Bandwagon jumping. Bandwagon jumping on the Sunset Strip. Totally prevalent in music. When the Beatles got big, everyone wanted to be the Beatles. When Guns N' Roses got big, everyone wanted to be Guns N' Roses. Bandana sales exploded. It's totally normal as a musician to be influenced by bands that you dig. And that means consciously or unconsciously, you start to copy bands that you dig. Like I said, it's a totally normal thing. It's not a crime, not yet. Like all things Jizzo, I take this premise and I push it to the absolute extreme. This story is fictional, but trust me, on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, there were hundreds of bands doing this exact same thing. So let's watch. I need a word that rhymes with reason. Teasin'? Pleasin'? Teasin', pleasin'. Very funny, dude. You know that's already been taken. Dangerous toys, remember? Cohesion. Lesion. How about lesion? This is a love song, dude. Tell me how the word lesion is going to fit into a love song. I got it. She loves him, but he gave her herpes. So our love was in season till you gave me that lesion. Eh? This was the fabulous songwriting team of Stevens and Lear. They've been together for over 10 years, through thick and thin. They played the Sunset Strip when Poison was king, then Guns N' Roses. Then when grunge took over, they ditched the leather vests and put on the red flannel shirts. They always had their finger on the musical pulse, even if that meant they had to change their musical style every 6 months. Stevens wrote the music, Lear the lyrics. Like Rodgers and Hammerstein before them, like Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, like Elton John and Bernie Taupin. They were a songwriting team in the tradition of classic songwriting teams, with one exception. Stevens and Lear never sold any records. They were in Stevens' small apartment guest room in Hollywood, the studio room. That's where all the magic happened. Stevens pointed to a picture on the wall. The walls were covered in glossy band photos of them, past and present. Remember that gig, Stevens said? I remember all of us in that cramped dressing room high-fiving each other before the show and shouting, "Let's get signed tonight." They didn't get signed that night, of course. They never got the big record deal like their contemporaries in Poison or Rat or LA Guns. See, when the Poison thing ran its course, they just morphed into a Guns N' Roses clone. They bought the leather vests and the cowboy boots, and Stevens bought a Les Paul just like Slash's. They both went out and got their Sunset Strip style tattoos at Sunset Strip Tattoo, of course. With the image change came the change in songwriting. Writing songs like Poison was easy. Silly 3-minute pop ditties about chicks and talking dirty. Trying to be like Guns N' Roses was more of a challenge. First, you needed bandanas. You needed lots of bandanas. Then, both of them started drinking heavily for realism. They started hanging out on the strip. They did their flyering and their posing, along with the other 1,000 or so tattooed black-haired guys that looked and dressed exactly like them. Stevens even threw up in front of the whiskey a few times to show his street cred. They played some local shows and got a little bit of interest around town, but in the end, nothing ever happened. Stevens and Lear were there at the whiskey the night Love Hate got their $1 million record deal with Sony. Stevens was particularly incensed about that. "Why them?" he shouted after the show. "They don't sound like Guns N' Roses. We sound like Guns N' Roses. Exactly like Guns N' Roses. That should be us getting signed, not them." You see, they couldn't understand that even with the image and the sound-alike songs, it still wasn't enough. You needed luck, and that's what they lacked. Luck. They needed the rock gods shining down on them from Olympus and sprinkling some of that magic fairy dust that secured the Willy Wonka golden ticket to fame and fortune and they just never got it. The 80s came and went, and so did the Sunset Strip music scene. In 1991, Stevens and Lear watched a then unknown Pearl Jam play the Scream Club on Highland Avenue to a whopping 60 people. And they thought, well, what the f*** is this? I don't get this. They play music and they're unhappy. Is that it? They're depressed, but they rock, right? So they tried it. They couldn't move to Seattle. Stevens, you see, had a day job with UPS delivering packages, and Lear still lived with his parents. So they just stuck it out on the Strip as a grunge act. They got the flannels, they did the Alice in Chains harmonies, and they wrote songs about being depressed and lonely. And together, they tried to imagine what it would be like living in a city that had perpetual rain. Stevens suggested that he start doing heroin. The motivation being, if it was good enough for Kurt Cobain, then why not? Nah, we can do it without the smack. We'll just listen to every record that comes out of Seattle and judiciously rip off every nuance. So they did. Unfortunately, the record companies in Los Angeles at that time weren't interested in signing any bands out of Los Angeles, even if they looked and sounded like they came from Seattle. So it was, the fabulous songwriting team of Stevens and Lear had come to another dead end. Korn came next. Stevens liked Korn's sound, so he went out and bought the prerequisite rectifier amplifiers and a bunch of low-tuned 7-string guitars. He got some fake dreadlocks from the local beauty outlet and glued them onto his head Rasta style. Lear had a harder time with the change. His voice wasn't really suited to the rapping and the low vocal gymnastics, but he did it anyway, and he ended up getting a hernia from the strain. Now they wrote songs about Adidas and cornholing and smoking chronic. They played the troubadour and the whiskey as much as they could, but it didn't work. All the patchouli in the world couldn't give them the authenticity they craved. One night, Stevens, in a fit of rage, took a pair of scissors and cut his dreads off. "Why'd you do that?" Lear said. "They wanted poison, we gave them poison. They wanted rat, we gave them rat. I even developed a hardcore drinking problem to be like Guns N' Roses, and that didn't work. What do we have to do?" I've written hundreds of songs about booze and chicks and fast cars. I even wrote about a heroin habit I didn't really have. I've done it all, to a T. Stevens' walls were full of pictures, mostly Stevens. A panoramic timeline through all their various guises and phases. Lear looked at the wall. That's me as Bret Michaels. That's me as Axl. That's me as Eddie Vedder. And now now I don't even know who I am. Stevens looked at him. "Well, maybe it's the lyrics." "What?" "If I'm a stone cold fox," Stevens explained, "and I am, there's no disagreement on that, then maybe it's the lyrics that are holding us back." "F*** you! If you're such a stone cold fox, then why don't you have a hot stripper girlfriend to support you?" "I'm a 24-hour rock guy," Stevens shouted. "I got no time to be anyone's boyfriend. Music is my life. I live, breathe, and eat music. Even when I'm delivering packages, I'm totally thinking about music." I guess it comes down to this. If your music is good and my lyrics are good, then what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Stevens decided. Nothing's wrong. We're going to make it. We're going to get signed someday. "You sound like that guy in the Decline of Western Civilization movie. Remember?" The interviewer asked, "What happens if you don't make it?" And the guy said, "Well, I am going to make it." And then she said, "Well, what if you don't?" And then he said, "Oh, I am." "I know," Stevens said wearily. "I know about the fucking movie. But that's not us. That guy was a goofball. He was a poser. We are going to make it. 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 We are gonna make it. Lear was silent for a second. Then he spoke. My parents want me to move out. They said a 30-year-old man shouldn't still be living with his parents. They want me to get a real job. That's what they called it, a real job. Dude, this is your job, Stevens said, and he waved his hands around the room. This, you write rad lyrics and I write killer music. That's our job. What am I gonna do? I got no skills. I can't be a carpenter or a plumber. I don't know how to program a computer. I don't know how to do anything. I can't even be a fucking bank teller. I can't even count. Stevens was silent again. He had never heard Lear talk like this before. It was shameful. Well, dude, I'm not giving up. I'm hot and I rock. Someday the world will recognize my genius and I'll be a huge rock star. And you're gonna be there with me, right, dude? Right? Okay, where were we? What's a good word that rhymes with reason?